This is how a poor Boy Scout became the richest man in America. But something you may not know is that he didn't open his first Walmart until he was 44 years old. Today, Walmart employs 2.2 million people. They bring in about $650 billion a year. If they were a country, they'd have the same GDP as Belgium, Sweden, or Poland. This is the incredible true story of Sam Walton. We're not ashamed of having money, but I just don't believe a big showy lifestyle is appropriate anywhere. Least of all in Bentonville, where folks work hard for their money and where we all know that everyone puts on their trousers one leg at a time. I'm not sure I ever really figured out this celebrity business. Why in the world, for example, would I get an invitation to Elizabeth Taylor's wedding in Hollywood? I still can't believe it was news I got my haircut at the barbershop. Where else would I get my haircut? Why do I still drive a pickup truck? What am I supposed to haul my dogs around in? A Rolls Royce? At the time, people wanted to believe he was this larger-than-life person swimming in pools of money. Instead, he spent all his time building Walmart. If he wasn't in one of his own stores, you could certainly find him in a competitor's store figuring out what he could learn. But before we get too far into the story, what comes to mind when you think of Walmart? Cheap or good deals? Ruins local businesses or gives everyone access to affordable products? Takes advantage of suppliers or provides suppliers the largest distribution platform on the planet? Regardless of your answers, I think being aware of your perspective before we start is important. Sometimes I'm asked why today, when Walmart has been so successful, when we're a $50 billion plus company, should we stay so cheap? That's simple, because we believe in the value of the dollar. We exist to provide value to our customers, which means that in addition to quality and service, we have to save them money. Every time Walmart spends $1 foolishly, it comes right out of our customers' pockets. Every time we save them $1, that puts us one more step ahead of the competition, which is where we always plan to be. You see the first hints of future success in the DNA of Walmart pretty early in Sam's life. One standout quality is his impressive work ethic and laundry list of accomplishments and experiences. At 13, he's the youngest Boy Scout in Missouri history to get promoted to the rank of Eagle. He's the president of the student body. He saves another boy his age from drowning, giving him CPR, bringing him back to life. He's the quarterback of an undefeated football team that he also happens to be a linebacker on despite being one of the smaller guys on the team. Wins state while playing basketball with a team that also goes undefeated. He's the head lifeguard at his swimming pool, and somehow he's figured out how to eat all his meals for free because he's also waiting tables at a restaurant. The list of accolades goes on and on. President of this, head of that. To top it all off, throughout all this, he's put together not just a paper route, but a whole paper route network that brings in $4,000 to $5,000 a year during the Great Depression. That's a serious amount of money. This is all before he even turns 18. You hear this, and it's just not a surprise that Sam built such a legacy. He doesn't talk about it much, but he mentions that potentially why he stayed so busy was due to his parents being, as he says, the two most quarrelsome people. So two things happen. He's out of the house as much as possible, and two, he vows never to have a relationship like that, which it seems he lived up to. He marries Helen and they're married 49 years before Sam's death. Sam does talk about how he learned resourcefulness from his father, and he says he never met anyone that could negotiate like him. He would buy and sell land. He even traded the farm they lived on for another farm in a whole other state. He's incredibly frugal, but he's always looking out for the family. At one point, when things were looking particularly grim, he traded his watch for a pig so they had food on the table. It's clear the Waltons learned to live on very little. Growing up in the Great Depression surely would leave an imprint on anyone. How does Sam end up getting into retailing and creating Walmart? Well, his first experience retailing is at a JCPenney. He's a floor salesman, and he's fantastic at it. Well, mostly. After hearing about all his successes, it's nice to hear when he falls short. His writing you can barely read. He doesn't file his sales numbers, leading Blake, his regional manager, to tell him, "Walton, I'd fire you if you weren't such a good salesman." His time with JCPenney ends due to the war starting. Sam's eager to join, but due to heart irregularity, he instead spends the war working in a DuPont gunpowder factory and supervising POW camps. Helen and I spent 2 years living the army life, and when I got out in 1945, I not only knew I wanted to go into retailing, I also knew I wanted to go into business for myself. Now, Helen makes one request that later becomes a foundation for Walmart's early success. She wants to raise a family in a town with less than 10,000 people, away from a big city, so she can ensure they keep the same values as she had when she was growing up. They agree on Newport, Arkansas, where Sam puts down $25,000 to buy out a Ben Franklin variety store. At that time, you could find Ben Ben Franklin variety stores all across the country. So there was a solid brand that Sam could build on. Sam pulls together the money, gets a spot across the street from another variety store, and starts building. Within a few years, he's built a bigger variety store than the guy across the street. Then a little while later, he's got the most successful Ben Franklin anywhere within 5 states. But this is where things start going sour for Sam. The landlord had seen how profitable Sam was and decided not to renew Sam's lease at any price. Since it was a Ben Franklin franchise, he kept all the signage and continued to run it himself. So here was Sam, forced to move to a new town with his wife and kids after they had spent the last 5 years putting down roots. The Waltons moved to Bentonville, Arkansas, and over the next few years, Sam opens a few more Ben Franklin stores over the state and even some into neighboring states. But it's the next chapter of Sam's life that opens the door for future success. Here's a simple lesson we learned, which others were learning at the same time. Say I bought an item for 80 cents and found that pricing it at $1, I could sell 3 times more of it than pricing it at $1.20. I might make only half the profit per item, but because I was selling 3 times as many, the profit overall was much greater. We take good deals for granted today. We have all kinds of options to get rock bottom deals on pretty much anything you want. But in the 50s, which is not that long ago, nobody was willing or thought about the fact that they could increase profits by bringing down their price. Shops were these local small variety stores with little or no competition that would sell a bit of this and a bit of that. They were charging 40 to 50% margins on everything they sold to cover their expenses. And it's easy to take for granted how obvious discounting is today. But back then, it wasn't so obvious. And until Sam laid it out, I wasn't aware of some of the other factors that created the environment for this type of discounting to exist. In the 50s and 60s, everything about America was changing. All the kids who had grown up on farms and in small towns had come home from World War II and moved to cities where all the jobs were. Except they weren't really moving to the cities. They were moving to the suburbs and commuting into the cities to work. Every family had at least 1 car, and many had 2. The country had started building its interstate highway system, all of which changed a lot of the traditional ways Americans were doing business. The downtowns of the big cities started to lose population and business to the suburbs, and the big downtown department stores had to follow their customers and build branch stores out in the suburban malls. Traditional diners and cafes suffered because of the new car-oriented chains like McDonald's and Burger King, and the old city variety stores like Woolworths and McCrory's just got smashed by Kmart and some of the other big discounters. The oil companies stuck service stations on practically every other corner, and pretty soon something called convenience stores like 7-Eleven came along and started filling up the other corners. So you've got a changing America after the Second World War. People own cars and live in houses just outside of major cities. And between the war and the Great Depression, you've got an America that's economically growing and expanding quickly. People want to do new things and buy stuff. But for the first while, most of this demand was only supplied around the suburbs that surrounded major cities. For the most part, where we were, in the small towns, you didn't see much of the mall construction and fast food neon that you saw everywhere else. But everybody wanted to feel up to date. And if they knew somebody had a big new grocery store, they'd drive there to shop it. When they saw that the prices were lower and the selection was better, they would go back again and again until somebody brought a supermarket to their town. It was this kind of strong customer demand in the small towns that made it possible for Walmart to get started in the first place. That enabled our stores to thrive immediately, and that eventually made it possible to spread the idea pretty much all over the country because the whole thing is driven by customers who are free to choose where they shop. It's that last sentence that Sam focuses on for his entire career. Make the customer number one and you will get their business. As to why the discounting wave appeared when it did is perhaps because of the Great Depression. You have a few generations that have been affected by a decade of scarcity, unsure of where their next meal will come from. Creates a demand for the shops that can offer cheap prices on everyday items. And while many of the great fortunes have been made at the start of a very new wave, Steve Jobs with the Mac computer, again with the iPhone, Henry Ford with the automobile, we saw with Elon Musk. He dropped out of school to start an internet company because he knew the internet wasn't one to miss. Today we're seeing companies like OpenAI spring to life and ride wild valuations on the back of this AI wave. So there was Sam Walton in the late 1950s at the start of the big discounting wave. But like all trends or waves, he certainly wasn't alone. Most of them were beat out over the years, but you have a handful of winners like Jim Senegal of Costco, Bernie Marcus of Home Depot. Much later, you've got Jeff Bezos of Amazon, and they all say they looked up to Sol Price of PriceSmart. I'll be making videos about all these guys in the future. But nobody learned more from other people than Sam. If he wasn't in one of his own stores, he'd be in a competitor's. I first met Sam in 1964. He was trying to convince our officers to franchise his discount stores in small towns. They gave him a flat no. The next day was Saturday, and I was shopping at the Kmart near my house. I walked over into the apparel section and saw this guy talking to one of the clerks. I thought, geez, that looks like the guy I met yesterday. What the heck is he doing way out here? I strolled up behind him, and I could hear him asking this clerk, well, how frequently do you order? How much do you order? And if you order on a Tuesday, when does the merchandise come in? He's writing everything she says down in a blue spiral notebook. Then Sam gets down on his hands and knees, and he's looking under this stacked table, and he opens the sliding doors and he says, how do you know how much you've got under here when you're placing that order? Finally, I said, Sam Walton, is that you? And he looked up from the floor and said, oh, Don, hi, what are you doing here? I said, I'm shopping. What are you doing? And he said, oh, this is just part of the educational process. That's all. Of course, he's still doing the exact same thing today, except he uses his little tape recorder. Sam spent his entire life checking out what the competition was doing. Right up until he died, you could find Sam in a Kmart grilling the manager with questions or checking out what products they had stocked. I remember that lesson I learned a long time ago in Newport, where we were selling products at such a high volume when they were priced at $1 instead of $1.20. So I started running all over the country, studying the concept from the mill stores in the East to California, where Sol Price started his FedMart in 1955. Sam is hooked on the idea of discounting because he knows how well it works. He'd been doing experiments for decades while building Ben Franklin franchises. And even though he's sure about it and has the proof, nobody is willing to back him to create Walmart #1. In the end, he was only able to finance 5% of that first Walmart. The other 95% came from Sam himself, remortgaging the home and every other single thing he owned. He was all in. He had his eyes set on Rogers, Arkansas for Walmart #1. Since there was already a Ben Franklin there, he hadn't been able to break in with his Ben Franklin stores. But with Walmart, he could compete directly. So on July 2nd, 1962, Sam opened the very first Walmart, and the top dogs at Ben Franklin were not pleased. We really stirred up a hornet's nest when we opened that first store. Along with the crowds of shoppers, a group of officials from Ben Franklin in Chicago, all dressed in pinstripe suits, showed up. They marched in like a military delegation, and in front of the store asked me, just as cold as they could be, where is Mr. Walton? They marched on back to Sam's office without a word. They were back there about a half hour, and then they marched out without so much as a goodbye. A few minutes later, Sam came down and told Whitaker and me that they had issued an ultimatum. Don't build any more of these Walmart stores. We knew he felt threatened because he had all those Ben Franklin franchises, but we also knew that Sam Walton wasn't the kind of guy you issued ultimatums to. For 2 years, Sam ran that first Walmart to be absolutely sure it was working before expanding. But when he was ready to go, he really went for it. And it's funny to think of these Walmarts today, with huge warehouses, with fluorescent lighting, shiny floors, and racks of organized merchandise. Because David Glass, a future CEO of Walmart, caught wind of what Sam was doing and visited for opening day of Walmart #3 in Harrison. It was the worst retail experience I'd ever seen. Walmart had brought a couple of trucks of watermelons in and stacked them on the sidewalk. He had a donkey ride out in the parking lot. It was about 115 degrees and the watermelons began to pop, and the donkey began to do what donkeys do, and it all mixed together and ran all over the parking lot. And when you went inside the store, the mess just continued, having been tracked in over the floor. He was a nice fellow, but I just wrote him off. It was just terrible. And yet Sam was thrilled. The first thing he says is if people were so eager to get his good deals and they were willing to endure donkey crap and rotten melons all over the store, surely they were doing something right. I went to work for Mr. Walton in 1972, when he only had 16 tractors on the road. The first month, I went to a driver's safety meeting. There were about 15 of us there, and I'll never forget, he said, if you just stay with me for 20 years, I guarantee you'll have $100,000 in profit sharing. Well, last time I checked, I had $707,000 in profit sharing. With each new Walmart opening, there were these opportunities created. At the beginning, it was just a store manager they had ability to buy in. They could own up to 2% of the store. Store managers act like they own the place. Because they did. They worked harder than the store managers from other companies, brought their own ideas to the table, and followed through on execution. It also meant that they kept a closer watch on the products to make sure nobody was stealing merchandise. This was incredibly successful. Other companies had the issue of not enough experienced managers that could handle a new store, and it limited their growth. Sam didn't care. He'd give these fabulous opportunities to folks that were inexperienced but incredibly hardworking. And Sam really credits a lot of Walmart's success to allowing key employees to buy in and own equity in the store. This is actually an idea that Sam doubles down on and expands on. Every associate of the company who has been with us at least a year and who works at least 1,000 hours a year is eligible for it. We contribute a percentage of every eligible associate's wages to his or her plan, which the associate can then take with them when they leave the company, either in cash or Walmart stock. Today, as I write this, profit sharing has around $1.8 billion in it. equity in the company that belongs to our associate partners. Everyone who works those 1,000 hours and is there at least a year gets to partake. Now, every employee at Walmart, right down to the cashiers and truck drivers, are acting like owners or working hard to have the privilege of being one. On his deathbed years later, Sam still continues to credit the folks in Walmart across stores in America with the success they've seen, and they continue to benefit from it. Once we started really rolling out the stores, the airplane turned into a great tool for scouting real estate. We were probably 10 years ahead of most other retailers in scouting locations from the air. We got a lot of great ones that way. From up in the air, we could check out traffic flows, see which way the cities and towns are growing, and evaluate the location of the competition. I'd get real low, turn my plane up on its side, and fly right over a town. Once we had a spot picked out, we'd land, go find out who owned the property, and try to negotiate the deal right then. Bud and I picked out almost all our sites that way, until we grew to about 120 or 130 stores. When you get really good at something, you do it as much as you can. And so Walmart starts expanding rapidly. He originally bought the plane as an efficient way to visit his Ben Franklin stores, but it became a real unique advantage during those early expansion years. Keep in mind, there's no Google Maps or certainly no drones to survey plots of lands at this time. You really have to credit Sam here for being so resourceful. He just tries stuff, and if it works, great. And if it doesn't, okay. Next play. Two things about Sam Walton distinguish him from almost everyone else I know. First, he gets up every day bound and determined to improve something. Second, he's less afraid of being wrong than anyone else I've ever known. And once he sees he's wrong, he just shakes it off and heads in another direction. When I think of what makes a really good mentor, this mentality is so important. Probably because it's easy for me to get entrenched in a plan or idea. But channeling your inner Sam Walton might be the reminder that you need to detach from your ideas and have humility when you're wrong. Distribution and transportation have been so successful at Walmart because senior management views this part of the company as a competitive advantage, not as some afterthought or necessary evil, and they support it with capital investment. A lot of companies don't want to spend any money on distribution unless they have to. Ours spends because we continually demonstrate that it lowers our costs. This is a very important strategic point in understanding Walmart. Of all the discounting giants, none was on the bleeding edge quite like Walmart, but it's funny. Many of the early executives have stories about fighting tooth and nail to bring these new advances to Walmart. Sam would shoot down every reason for having it. Some of our guys around here find it amusing that I get so much credit for Walmart's reputation as a world leader in retailing and distribution technology. It's not because we're not on the cutting edge. I put up a pretty good fight every time somebody wants to buy some new system for this, that, or the other thing. I want them to think hard and long about how they're going to justify the expense before they even come to me with it. I love how consistent Sam is about putting the customer first, constantly looking through that lens before considering any new expense, because as he says over and over, every dollar we spend is a dollar from our customer's pocket, and every dollar we save is a dollar back into that customer's pocket. It's not that he's anti-progress. Clearly, he eventually does spend money on the technology that not only saves the customers money, but their investment becomes the backbone to Walmart's hyper expansion and success. There is this extra element to it all, though. It seems that the scar of getting kicked out of that first Ben Franklin store in Newport makes Sam obsessed with controlling everything. All his competitors are working with third-party distributors, but Sam owns his entirely. Every truck on the road has a Walmart logo, and even better, the driver, as we know, is part of the profit sharing, so he's looking out for Walmart's interest as a part owner. Our drivers really are extremely loyal to their mission, which is to serve the stores. They report back to Walmart continually on things like merchandise thrown out behind the store that looked like it was good and morale problems in the stores. For a long time, Sam would regularly show up to the driver's break room at 4 a.m. with a bunch of donuts and just sit there for a couple hours talking to them. When you read this, it's just not a surprise that Walmart crushed their competition. Every step of the way, Sam is looking for an edge and doing everything he can to serve the customer. Customers want longer hours. Walmart stays open longer than anyone else. Cheaper prices. Walmart price matches and beats anyone in town. They make a giant free parking lot so customers can drive there. They revolutionized distribution so every store has access to as much merchandise as they need within 48 hours. They make it effortless to return a product that customers don't like. They give equity opportunities to every employee so that each person wearing a Walmart uniform will act like an owner. When you look at history's greatest mentors, they never stop looking for ways to do things better. And Sam did discount retailing better than anyone else on the planet. The last chapter of this book is Sam reflecting on his life. He talks about how he likely wouldn't have even written the book if he hadn't been dying of cancer, or if he hadn't been urged on by his family, friends, and colleagues. There isn't anyone else at Walmart that could have written this book. Something I found incredible was how many quotes came from other people. Here's a guy with a career that spans multiple decades. He's incredibly competitive, and yet folks from day one are contributing to his autobiography. He even has competitors in the book thanking him for making them better businesses because of his competition. And every single one of his children has something kind to say about their father. In fact, the last few words written in the book are by his son, Rob, about how in the final weeks of his life, he's presented with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. This happens in Bentonville, Arkansas, surrounded by his family and Walmart associates, cheering one last time for their fearless leader. It's hard not to finish a book like this and not be inspired by the legacy Sam Walton leaves behind. I highly recommend Made in America to anyone building a business. You certainly don't need to be thinking about building a retail empire to get something from this. It's packed with real stories and wisdom for anyone looking to build something great, and above all, putting their customers first. Thanks so much for following along. I'm going to be making lots more of these, so please subscribe and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.